Hello and welcome to the Undercut podcast. I'm your host, Jesse Billington, and we're back to review the 11th round of the 2025 Formula One season, the Austrian Grand Prix. To do this, I'm joined by Thiemo Daily. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. We're somehow already at round 11. Silverstone's just around the corner. That snuck up like an absolute, well, creep, quite frankly, but I'm quite happy about it. And I'm not boiling, unlike yourself and Jacob here, so I'm already doing better.
Yeah, it's pretty toasty here. I know that it's about sort of an air temp of 30. I don't know what that translates to as track temp for the road outside my house, but I can imagine it's equally as warm. Jacob, Timo has already spoiled it. We are, of course, joined by On the Cubs pub chat co-host Jacob Phillips. How are you this evening, aside from sweaty?
I'm sweaty, I'm roasting. You might not see it when you listen to this back, guys, but I'm recording outside. It is that hot. Silverstone's round the corner. I don't quite have a beer in hand, but it does feel like the British summertime is really upon us now, which is great.
As a bonus for everyone else, we can just safely assume that he's recording this in the style of Winnie the Pooh. We just see the top. He's probably not wearing anything else below to keep the temperature as cool as possible
I
for
mean,
himself.
it's hot, but it's not quite that hot.
He can't get away with that with his day job. I can because I spend most of it sat behind the screen, but yeah, Jacob cannot. Anyway, we'll move on to a bit of news coming out the back of the Austrian Grand Prix weekend. The first bit of news is that Austria has been renewed on the Formula One calendar and has been confirmed up to and including 2041. Also, Baku has been moved to a Saturday so that it doesn't clash with the National Day of Mourning for the country. Same weekend and spotting the calendar just simply a day earlier. And we now have 3 pre-season testing spots: Barcelona on the 26th through 30th of January, Sakir the 11th through 13th, and 18th through 20th of February, which makes sense because they will need to work out the kinks of the new setups, not only in the chassis, but also the new powertrains that are joining us for 2026.
Yeah, it's rare, first of all, to have three pieces of news here that are all related to Austria post race weekend. Normally, we get past weekend and we move straight on to something that's not relevant, also a rarity in itself. But I don't know about you two. I'm a little curious as to why Austria's got such a long renewal. I don't mind it as a circuit, but it's nowhere near top of my list in terms of favourites. And I know that's obviously how they base renewals is off my personal preferences, but 2041 is a long time, and I think only Miami is the other Grand Prix venue that has a longer or equally silly extension.
Yeah, I was thinking this today. We've seen recently, haven't we, that contracts have been handed out, some 5 years, some 3 years in the case of Mexico, I think, and some longer deals. I think this being a 16 or 15-year deal, which is quite unprecedented and quite long. But it might be something to do with the Red Bull money. I know the Mateschitz family still own the circuit. They've got a lot of financing behind it, a lot of projects going on in Austria. So maybe they've got long-term financial security and have been able to put the money behind it, because essentially that's how these contracts are given out, is money, and they've got quite a lot of it. So it might be something to do with that.
Yeah, if they were able to make some sort of early payments to secure a few years, that might have been able to buy them a more favourable contract with Formula One. Obviously, looking at the turnout for this weekend's race in Austria as well, they had plenty of people packed into those stands, even if they did seem to start fading away not long after turn three. But yeah, there
Can't
was
imagine why that would have been.
yeah, a good turnout from the fans across Europe and obviously sort of further afield. So they're obviously making their money back on it. So as for a sort of financial and business proposition, the Austrian Grand Prix makes a whole lot of sense. The rest of it is just sort of logical, really. Obviously, Baku saying, "Yep, we'll do the Grand Prix that weekend, but can we shuffle it a bit earlier?" Which, given that they do things like that with Las Vegas and they have done it previously with some of the races in the Saudi Arabian Peninsula, where they have to work around holy days there as well, is not uncommon. So it's nice to see that sort of flexibility being allowed. That also means we get to keep some of the slightly more interesting circuits. Baku has a bit of a hot and cold mentality with F1, or certainly the results that it puts up. But we have had some good races there, and I'm excited to see this flexibility allowing it to stay on the calendar for a bit longer. That will hopefully encourage it to try and renew its contract.
Yeah, this year could be a good year for Baku. I know we are getting used to saying that a bit, but I do think that this year it could have it. We obviously had the last kind of lap chaos last year, and you had the interesting strategic battle with Piastri throughout the Grand Prix. So it was one of the more interesting ones last year. But I'm thinking we could get a Baku of old if we're not careful, which I'm happy to be not careful about because that'd be quite fun.
Yeah, I've gone a bit. Jesse mentioned about being hot and cold there. I think I've gone a bit cold on Baku, actually. I think as these cars have lost their slipstreaming effect with the ground effects regulations, Baku sort of lost the the one thing it really had, which is obviously the battles you had down the main straight there. But hopefully, like you say, Timo, we're going to have a good year this year, and I think the contract's up for renewal at the end of next year. So we'll see how many years, if any, that it gets come this time next year.
Yeah, I can tell you now because I've got the list up in front of me. Baku will be on it until at least 2026. So we'll see what happens after then. But obviously, if F1 is treating it favourably and allowing it to sort of shuffle around, it's positive signs. Elsewhere, if we dive into a bit of feeder series action for the weekend, Richard Verschoor is the new championship leader in Formula 2, which means that the F2 leader is now older than the F1 championship leader. Oscar Piastri, born 6th of April 2001. Richard Verschoor, about 5 months prior, December 16th, 2000. So do we think after this year it's going to be time for Verschoor to hang up the helmet for Formula 2 and look elsewhere?
I mean, he's been around for, you might have to correct me, is it 5 years or maybe even longer? It seems like every time I turn on,
This is a fifth.
my TV in the last 5 years, he's been around. It's certainly a household name now. And he's got a healthy lead, obviously, after Dunn's disqualification yesterday. So I think after this season, I don't think we're going to be seeing him in F1 anytime soon. I think that all those seats will be taken, and there are probably a few better drivers on the grid for those positions. But maybe a career in cars, GTM or Formula E or something like that. And he's certainly a very competent driver. I've always enjoyed seeing him, and his racecraft's pretty good as well. So it remains to be seen where he'll be next year. But it's nice that he's leading the championship.
I think he could cause a bit of chaos if he entered Formula E or possibly even IndyCar. I think he'd be fine for a step straight up into that IndyCar seat, looking at his racecraft. Wait and see how he does if he gets to the ovals, but on the street circuits and the road courses, there's a lot to like about the way that he makes a car dance. So we'll see what he does, but yeah, I'd wager this should probably be Richard's last season in F2. Timo, I know you've had similar thoughts.
I'm just impressed this weekend that he managed to win in Austria and keep it. So I'm just happy with that one because that is a gremlin that has been on his back many a time.
Yeah, and in front of a relatively speaking home crowd, though many of them weren't necessarily wearing orange for him, but for a fellow countryman. But the point's the point, they were all still singing along when he stood atop the rostrum after that feature race. Speaking of standing atop the rostrum, Bernie Ecclestone was at the Austrian Grand Prix. First time out in the daylight for the old man, and this was the first time he's been on the podium for a Grand Prix. He was there to hand out the FIA sort of winners medal things that you get because I guess that Mohammed Ben Sulayem was busy doing corruption somewhere, so they had to bring in someone that was a good place fill. So they brought in Bernie Ecclestone. So yeah, he was there.
Bernie for
It was.
president.
I mean, I'm not going to say no, as controversial as that sounds. I do have a lot of time for Bernie Ecclestone, actually, controversial as it may be, and some of his views were slightly and probably still are slightly backward, but he certainly put the F1 we know today, on the map, and some of the circuits, for example, Baku, we were just talking about that a minute ago, was his idea. So he sort of put the sport in the spotlight, and without him, I don't think we'd be where we are today. So I was happy to see him.
But
Made a nice change.
very much like friend of the podcast, Harry Benjamin was saying in the post-race commentary as he was going up on the podium, he is an icon of the sport, and Formula One wouldn't be what it is today without him. So, yeah, he's got some quirky ideas and opinions about certain things that nobody probably asked him about, but he voiced them anyway. But in the grand scheme of things, he's done, I think, a lot more good than bad. And you'd be very interested to see a what-if scenario of what Formula One would look like had he not come along at any point, quite frankly, never mind in the way he did and in the massive way that he did.
I would always like to sort of test his sprinkler theory, and I think, given today's weather, I think I could do with a sprinkler right now as well. So always wondered what that'd be like on a Grand Prix weekend.
Yeah, I'd quite like to see sort of a Marvel style what if series about Formula One, just to sort of see sort of like those what ifs. What if Bernie became FIA president? What if so and so never had a crash? What if so and so won a championship that year? I'd always be curious to see how that would pan out. Like, what if Alonso won in that 2012, 2014 Ferrari?
Won any of those that got those 12 points he needed to get the 5 other championships or whatever it is.
Yeah,
just massively throw things upside down, wouldn't it be good for them? Maybe that's something for the off season.
That's something to discuss in the off season. Anyway, from the what ifs to the what did happens, and we'll jump into our team by team race analysis. Kicking off with McLaren, who extend their lead at the top of the championship. Norris qualifying on pole, Piastri qualifying third, and an early move from Piastri puts him up into second, while Norris holds on to pole, and that is how they come home, come the checkered flag. This is McLaren's first win here since 2001, so a huge sort of hurdle for them to overcome. I think that's the fun thing we're seeing with McLaren's new dominance is the sort of how long it's been since McLaren have won at so many of these circuits. It's
You
quite
wait till Williams catch up.
yeah, there's going to be some big numbers there, but I think allowing the McLarens to battle made it a more interesting than this race could have otherwise been. It was a pretty peerless performance, really, from both of them. Oscar a little more risky in some moves. We did obviously see the team sort of say no more of those 50-50 ones, but Lando a bit more confidently unflappable and a solid rebuild off of a shonky Canada finish. There were a few moments of wobbles, but all in, Norris had a clean weekend and kept his foot in the fight. The gap between he and Piastri less than a race win as they head into Lando's home race. He's got the Lando stands at Silverstone. He's got a hyped up home crowd, a rebuilt spirit. There could be another interesting outing for the Papaya cars. One important thing that was raised over this weekend was Andrea Stella said that the reason behind the crash in Canada wasn't necessarily Norris going for a gap that didn't exist. Part of it was the fact that Oscar had made such a huge move to overtake, he'd completely drained his battery. So the car's retardation through that section as it started to charge was essentially overrated to what any of them anticipated. So the gap sort of closed a lot quicker than I think either driver anticipated. But that could be him covering.
Is that not just a long way of saying he went for a gap that didn't exist?
It is, but it's sort of Andrea Sella sort of protecting the team image and protecting both of his drivers, which I think is an interesting point to sort of view the team standing on. Not necessarily sort of to make excuses for Norris, but to look outwardly at how McLaren's currently functioning.
I think
If
it's
only I
at the
couldn't
end of
have
the day.
gone through it so quickly. Go on, Jacob. Sorry.
No worries, Timo. Yeah, I think it's very good, and they seem to be handling the PR situation, especially as we have two fierce rivals up at the front. Yeah, I don't think there's too much in it really. I think I was on the Canadian Grand Prix podcast, and for me, nothing's changed in that situation. It was a mistake. It was a really poor move in my opinion, from Lando. He's going to learn he's still only 6 or 7 years into his F1 career. But for me, it was nothing more than a Lando mistake, to be honest.
Yeah, and I think the interesting part from this week in particular is, as you say, just we got to see them battle a bit, but we yet to see them properly go wheel to wheel to with each other, as we've seen with other big championship battles over the years. We got a glimpse of it, obviously, initially, but we've not had it go continuously a bit. But like, say, for example, Leclerc and Verstappen in 22 in the early part of that season, or Lewis and Verstappen, obviously, in all of 2021. We've not yet had that kind of consistent over an entire race duration sort of battle. So I'm hoping we get to see that a few times this season at least.
It's certainly
Norris did
it's certainly
go
coming.
on.
It's certainly
Yeah,
coming.
yeah.
And I think, given the nature of Silverstone, it's certainly a circuit that we can go wheel to wheel racing at. Some of the circuits we've had so far this season, Imola, for example, and a few of the others, you aren't able to do so. So I do think we're going to see some wheel to wheel action between those two this weekend. I'm not saying in what order they're going to finish, but yeah, I think we're going to see some wheel to wheel action
Yeah,
this weekend.
Norris did need a Grand Prix like that, but it's an amusing thing already because we've already said that a few times this season, and then 2 minutes later he reverts back to normal. So I'm not entirely sure how much to make of Norris turning things around, quote unquote. But I think for me the standout moment from the entire weekend was the team radio from Oscar Piastri, which if neither of you two have seen this, he got blocked by the two Alpine drivers and came up with the belter of Alpine still find a way to fuck me up all these years later, huh? And I just thought he doesn't get angry on the radio very often, but when he does, it's a classic.
I mean, what don't Alpine fuck up these days?
Well, that's very true.
Was that after Colapinto tried to push him into the wall, or was that a different point in time?
I think that was the first time, and I can't remember which one happened first, but after second time it happened, because both cars did it at one point, he then got on the radio and was frustrated. It's kind of like, one is bad enough, both of you, come on.
Yeah. There's something clearly going wrong on the Alpine pit wall, because especially if you watch back the onboards and with the radios, obviously they're not quite perfectly in sync, but they were very late coming in with the news that they had a blue flagged car coming past them, and unfortunately it just sort of went a bit awry. So
Also, the excuse from Colapinto, I didn't see him. You have mirrors, and it's bright orange behind you. You can't see that.
yeah, it's a bit of a wet one from Colapinto. Meanwhile, further down the order, Ferrari, Leclerc qualified third, Hamilton qualified fourth. On the face of it, great qualifying session from them as well, up there with the McLarens. But when you look at the pace deficit, Lando almost half a second up the road from Leclerc, and then they would finish third and fourth on the road.
Yeah, it's. Sorry, you go, Timo.
Okay. it's a curious one of this one because all season we've been going, oh, Ferrari, they're not there. But even when they're supposedly bad as they are at the moment, by kind of weirdly their own standards and everyone else's standards, yet those are two different things. They're not actually that bad still. It's a very odd kind of situation to look at. And they're back ahead of Mercedes now by 1 point in the constructors. So it's going well for them in that respect. And you're kind of looking at them going, how the hell are you in second overall? It's baffling. Everything about you is baffling. And for me, again, we talked a little bit about this Jesse post race, but Vettel, Sainz, and now Hamilton, Ferrari need to listen to their drivers a bit more, especially when one of them is a seven-time world champion and the most successful driver they've had since Schumacher. They had a massive gap, I think, back to P5 to afford taking the risk of keeping him out a bit longer and could have gained some valuable knowledge as a result. And you made the point, I think, of they want to keep Leclerc happy. And I agree with that, but Leclerc doesn't need that sort of help to get into P3 anyway, and he needs to know how to fight Lewis. So that when, in the ideal situation, they find themselves where McLaren are, they know how to fight one another respectfully and don't do a Canada or what is going to be a position at later in the season where they inevitably come together because they've got too close. So it's just Ferrari being Ferrari in yet another fun and frustrating way.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. Like I know we had sort of the discussion, little tit for tat in the sort of notes to putting this together, and I was like, I wholeheartedly agree with what you say, but there is that important caveat of Ferrari will always Ferrari, and I don't like that as sort of like a blasé hand wave explanation for them doing strange things when it comes to strategy and decisions. But that's the way they seem to run, and pressure at the moment seems to have shifted, not necessarily from Fred Vasseur, but to also John Elkan, who's sort of at the top of the tree for all of this, who's brought in more.
Partly in thanks to Fred, going, we've changed everything else.
Yeah, yeah, because Fred's gone, well, look, we've changed everything, but there's still a few other things we haven't changed. And Mr. Elkan, you might be one of them. So it's an interesting one. But yeah, best wishes to Fred, who had to duck out of the weekend for personal reasons. Hopefully all is well there. All in though, I think it was a clean performance from Ferrari. Their actual on-track pace, their sort of performance across the weekend in a sort of sporting sense was really good. The upgrades working, providing more stable platform throughout the race as the fuel loads changed and as the tyres changed. A lot of lift and coast for Charles, either fueling issues or gearbox woes, from my opinion. Either way, it was managed well, and their double points finish puts them back ahead of Mercedes. Potentially, they're just trying to limp a gearbox or an engine that bit further into the season just to relieve a bit of pressure later on. But obviously, Austria is known for its slightly higher curbs, which are very violent when it comes to sort of the vibrations that it causes. It can knock sensors loose, it can cause issues. So potentially, they were just looking at mitigating some circumstances, just extending those components a little bit further, playing a slightly longer game, which is I don't feel it's right to give it Ferrari credit for being foresightful, but I imagine every team is being so. But we also have such a low bar for Ferrari's current performance when it comes to those sort of things that it's also kind of worthy of praise.
On the face of it,
slight note actually.
So on the face of it, 3 and 4 is not a bad result. Certainly a podium there for Charles. But you compare it to this time last year, they were pretty much in both championship fights, especially the Constructors' Championship. And I don't know why at the beginning of this season they decided to change a lot of elements to their car. I think they've changed the whole rear suspension, and they've fallen, almost a second behind McLaren on race pace. They were a pit stop behind them yesterday. So I just don't know why they do this. And it seemed very strange to me at the beginning of this year, especially as we have a whole new rule set next year, whereby a lot of money could and should have been spent arguably there. I don't know why they changed it, but yeah. On another day, you've got to think that Mercedes and cooler temperatures will be there as well. So although 3 and 4 is a good result, on another day there'll be more cars there fighting, and that 3 and 4 could easily turn into a fifth and a sixth. So I'm still not too convinced with Ferrari, I must say.
Or Jesse's phrase from earlier, it's just Ferrari being Ferrari as to why they decided to rejig everything at the start of the year, and that's why it's still a frustrating case to be their fans as we always are. But I think it's also just quite nice, is it not necessarily a Ferrari point here, but just as a reminder of it, we got through an Austrian Grand Prix weekend without really any kind of frustration from track limits, and that was quite nice. It makes no sense. You're saying about the Ferrari changed everything. Austria changed a few things because the curbing was different, I think, this year as well. And finally made some necessary changes to it, and it might have actually worked.
And there was some gravel down on the final turn. I'm not sure if it was there last year, potentially was, but I know that was certainly the corner where most of the track limits occurred. So I think that gravel has made a bit of a difference.
Yeah, I think they sort of closed up the apron of tarmac and then sort of brought the gravel closer to the edge of the circuit. So it sort of meant there was this sort of physical impediment if you were to overstep the boundaries, which is quite interesting. Obviously, we mentioned Ferrari, mentioned the fact that under different conditions, maybe Mercedes would be closer. Russell qualified fifth, Antonelli qualified ninth. Russell would finish where he started fifth, and Antonelli would famously DNF. It's just a bit of an unfortunate one for Kimi, a bit of dirty air, a tricky braking zone, jinking to avoid the heavy braking of Liam Lawson ahead. It just spelled disaster. Turn three had been a cruel mistress all weekend long. If it's spent any time watching the feeder series, you'll know that for certain. And
Not my fault.
not our fault. No, Thiemo hadn't jinxed that at all. Importantly, Kimi's now earned 2 penalty points on his license and a 3-place grid penalty for Silverstone off the back of it. George just damage controlling the day through, really. Nothing wrong with that, but off the back of the Canadian Grand Prix, it does seem like a drop off. You do have to bear in mind the heat was a big hurdle for the Silver Arrows, 30 degrees Celsius air temperature, north of 50 degrees Celsius track temperature. Their car just cannot handle its tyres in those conditions, especially on the old, very open faced tarmac of the Red Bull Ring. It's an incredibly aggressive sort of tarmac compound. And the constant back and forth over Mercedes courting Max Verstappen is an interesting topic that's been at the fore over the past few weekends. It'd be George who'd likely be dropped for the 4-time champion, as you wouldn't pour all that development into Antonelli only to drop him after a season. That would look like a mistake. George's contract is coming to an end, so the hunt is on for a drive two for him. Will Max take the gamble on a team whose previous car at a change of regulations was counter to the best pathway? Mercedes are still feeling the sort of reverberations of that. They're still about a season and a half behind in development when it comes to sort of getting that car understood in a sort of mechanical sense. And it's a big ask. Even now, Mercedes is still precarious. It quite literally blows hot and cold each weekend, depending on whether it's blowing hot or cold. They just don't know how to get the suspension and tyres turned on. So, with all of that compounded, it's an interesting way of looking at the Mercedes story after Austria.
Yeah, there's I wouldn't be too worried if I was Mercedes, but it depends how many hot tracks we're going to. I think that Silverstone will work a lot better for them, and I think when it comes to Kimi Antonelli there, for me that was a rookie mistake. You know, he hasn't had too many of them. I think he's actually done quite well. I was a little bit sceptical at the start of the season, but although maybe the results haven't been quite to Mercedes' liking, I think his podium last weekend or the weekend before, should I say, in Canada, really showed his capabilities, and we know from his F2 days that he's got some speed as well from his junior career. Um, Max Verstappen joining Mercedes, I would actually quite like to see it, and I'm sure a lot in the F1 paddock would as well. But it depends really how Red Bull are looking, I guess, and we'll touch on them, I'm sure, in a minute. How they're looking forward for the new rule set, and if you believe rumours in the paddock, and obviously they are at the moment just rumours, but you would think that Mercedes would be a good gamble going forward.
No, nothing to add from Thiemo. I think it's an interesting one. I think the Red Bull rumours moving forwards and how their car's panning out is an interesting one. I've got a few fingers on the pulse in that area, and it's not positive coming out of Milton Keynes. They're having to do a lot of learning when it comes to the development of this next style of car, when it comes to its aerodynamics. Powertrain wise, I think they're quite happy with what they've sort of been able to put together, but certainly aerodynamics wise, there's a lot of unanswered questions they're hoping to try and test their way out of. But yeah, maybe
What's an amusing thing, kind of as a result of Newey leaving, is he's got his board drawings. It's really nice that he goes old school about it, and then as soon as he leaves, he's taken all his paper with him, and you go, "We digitized that, right? So we can learn from it in the future. We did digitize.
we can scan that in,
Oh,
right? Yeah, we remember to like even photocopy it. Yeah, we made copies. We thousands of copies. No, we didn't. But yeah, it's interesting.
Racing Point made copies.
Yeah, they often do. Speaking of Red Bull, Verstappen qualified seventh. Not a great qualifying session for him, hampered by the double spinning Pierre Gasly ahead of him, who executed a perfect 720 through that final turn. Verstappen then, as we've already mentioned, would go on to DNF. Yuki Tsunoda, meanwhile, struggling to get a run in qualifying, looking for the gaps on track to make it work, but didn't. Qualified 18th. On paper, it doesn't look as bad as it sounds because pace-wise, he wasn't too far off. The problem with Austria is you get that huge compression of sort of the field where it's such a short lap that even the smallest mistake is magnified hugely over the length. And yeah, Tsunoda unable to really bring it back, finishing 16th. yeah, this brings to the end of 31 race point scoring streak for Max Verstappen, 31 Grand Prix scoring points all gone. Unfortunate move from Kimi, early racing incident, though, as I've already said. Sonoda, though, is the interesting one here, struggling with the chassis this weekend too. Upgrades and tweaks upsetting the car more than anything, with Max also hating the adjustments, complaining of lack of front end grip and rear end grip in the pre-race sessions. This is the first time since Monaco 2007 that the best finishing Red Bull car has been lapped twice. I reckon Yuki has until the end of the season at this rate, which checks out as there are reports that he's currently being courted by Cadillac. But off the back of a series of horrendous performances, his seat is surely untenable, and he's just giving Isaac Hadjar a season to get settled before he's moved up. I can't see them moving Liam up unless Max leaves, but even then, like we've already said, there's rumours that Russell might head to that seat instead. All in, it's a clusterfuck from a variety of points, and we won't know what the truth is for some time. My usual points of news have nothing really to concrete any of it beyond sort of everything starting to go wrong. On Max's side of things, though, it's important to note that he's now over 2 clear race wins off of the top of the championship and just 9 points ahead of Russell in fourth. If we're led to believe his contract has an exit clause that states if he's below P3 before the end of July, he can walk. We have both Silverstone and Belgium before the month is out, so Silverstone's early forecast is potentially wet and cool, which might bring the Mercedes back into contention as well.
It's interesting for Red Bull, isn't it? And I was on the it was either review or the preview for Canada, and we said how interesting would it be if we had a Red Bull without Max Verstappen? And technically, yesterday we had it because he wasn't really involved in the race. And I think you mentioned it there, Jesse, about being an absolute mess. I think once Max Verstappen leaves, and I think that clock is ticking now. I think maybe by the end of 27 we'll see a red Max Verstappenless Red Bull, but it's certainly not looking good. And we're caught in a really sort of difficult position here because we've had a history, haven't we, of chopping and changing the second driver, and I think hopefully you'll share this opinion as well. The second car, or certainly the car, is very hard to drive, and it's certainly very hard for someone who isn't Max Verstappen, because let's be honest, Yuki Tsunoda isn't to that level. It's very hard for him to master that car. So I do wonder what another driver would be able to do in it. So I'm not sure I'm seeing any benefit in getting rid of Yuki Tsunoda before the end of the season. Although I do agree with you, Jesse, I can't really see a future at Red Bull for him.
Yeah, I think the benefit Ryuki possibly has is if he's offered a contract extension in the top team, that new car design might come in and be something that suits him, but we just don't know. And given that Red Bull themselves don't know yet, it's all very much up in the air.
I would say, just go off the point you made there, is that if he gets a contract extension or gets offered a contract extension to stay for all of next season, for example, hopefully his dismal performance this year will kind of shake Red Bull out of the mindset that they've been in for so long, which is just designing and evolving a car to suit one driver. And maybe with the new regulation, like you say, even if it starts off terrible, you can at least try and hone it a little bit to counteract for both drivers and for it to suit them a bit more. And the interesting thing here is that when it was Liam Lawson at the start of the year, everyone was really happy to jump on and criticize and tear him apart because for a variety of reasons, which we can always go back into. But it's interesting that Yuki now isn't getting that same treatment as much. It's now, oh, it's definitely the car, and it's not can't be the driver. And you go, well, hang on a minute, you can't have it both ways. And it goes back to what we were saying post China and the whole Red Bull segment that I can easily refer to there and got all my thoughts down on paper then. But there is a little bit of part two to this now because we are at a point where if we've got a bit more data and we're going to keep having more data until they do something about it. But when you look at the entire time that Yuki's been in F1 and you compare it to the entire time that Lawson's been in F1, and statistically and mathematically, they're pretty much even. But the fact that they're pretty much even goes in Lawson's favour because he's been there for about a fifth of the time, and that time has been spread out over a long period as well because you've got these massive gaps between his first 5 and his second 6 races. And then you change his car. He's driving 3 times in less than 12 months with the Racing Bulls from last year to the Red Bull of this year to the Racing Bulls again of this year, and kind of makes what he's doing all the more impressive. And I know we'll talk about Lawson with the Racing Bulls later, but I think it's mad that we've got a situation where the Racing Bulls is able to qualify and finish higher than a Red Bull. And Tsunoda got lapped not once but twice in Austria. He was the only driver to get lapped twice, and that was including by Bortoleto in a Sauber. And yeah, the qualifying was poor from him, but Hulkenberg qualified in 20th and got up into the points. So if he can do that again in a different Sauber, I'm not too kind of convinced of the, oh, it's a bad car and you can't do anything with it argument, because it's a Sauber and a Haas and a Racing Bulls all getting ahead of you. And I go, you're kind of running out of excuses at that point
There
as
is
to you should at least be getting 10th.
there is the important caveat to that of he did pit stop late on and serve his 30-second penalty to just clear his book ahead of Silverstone. So he was put a huge distance.
True, but he also made that mistake happen, I'm pretty sure, with the
Yeah.
30 seconds. So again, this is just poor racecraft.
Pinto and therefore earned his 30 seconds. So there is obviously the question of his racecraft. But when you're just going by the finishing order and the twice lapped, it is important to remember that element to it.
But he put himself in those positions for the race.
It's a valid point that he was so far off the pace that he was lapped once and by a certain amount of cars. But the second lapping point is sort of a contentious one when you factor in the penalty.
But arguably, even being lapped once is still, for me, not good enough in a Red Bull. And for me, you looked at yesterday, for example, I know, Thiemo, we talked about this off air. Kimi Antonelli, for example, a top point scorer there was out of the race. Max Verstappen, another point scorer. And there was a huge chance for the smaller teams, if you like, to get points yesterday. We saw it with Bortoleto and Aston Martin, for example, as well. And realistically, he's still nowhere near the points on those days. We saw Kimi Antonelli get who DNF'd in, I think, Imola in Spain. He wasn't there in the points. You look at China early in the year, and I know he was still new to Red Bull then, but 2 Ferraris got disqualified, and he's still not there to capitalise on these mistakes. So for me, very minimum in that car, he needs to be top 10 or pushing for the top 10 every week, and he's still nowhere near that. So regardless of how bad the car is, and I think it is quite a poor car, and Max is doing really, really out of this world things with it, he's still not meeting his minimum targets for me, Yuki.
What you say about China, he was still at Racing Bulls for that one, but in Australia and China, I think he qualified quite well in both, but wasn't able to convert either into the points. I think he qualified in 5th in Australia and didn't do anything with that. And Lawson in the Red Bull still managed to finish ahead of him. So while he didn't get points then either, it still showed that there was something lacking.
Oh yeah, I think I was getting a little bit confused there, but yeah,
understandable considering what Red Bull do. But I think going back to what you were saying earlier, Jacob, with what do they do rival-wise for this season, next season, beyond? I think the only sensible thing to do, which I know Red Bull's open to salt, is decide who you're going to keep in the car during the summer break. But then whoever you put in that second Red Bull seat, you keep them for the rest of the season and you keep them for all of next season.
Mm-hmm.
And be that Liam Lawson, be that Yuki Tsunoda, be Isaac Hadjar, you take the time to, I don't know, develop the driver a bit and get the car suited a bit more to them. You stick them in as many old Red Bulls as you can just to get them used to everything. You know, what Mercedes did with Kimi Antonelli. And then you've got that time to have whoever else you have in the 2 Racing Bulls. You've got a solid season, maybe 2 seasons if it's Hadjar staying there, which would be my advice there. And you then develop that through, and then you've got good options for 27. You've got Lindblad ready, you've got Lawson potentially ready, you've got Hadjar ready. And then if you end up in a situation where you don't have Max or Yuki, you've got 3 drivers potentially all ready for it in one way or another, fully developed. Because even if you don't have Lindblad in a Racing Bulls next year, for example, you can still do what they did with Antonelli and just test the absolute daylights out of him and get him as sorted as you need to do. Again, you Antonelli the situation. But what they shouldn't do is what Alpine are doing, essentially, what they did at the start of this year, and just keep chopping and changing, expecting the driver to fix it. We are all kind of eating a little bit of humble pie when it comes to Sergio Perez now, because we've seen how his worst results last year, there was one 17th, I think it was Silverstone. The other times he was classified as 17th was when he didn't actually finish the race. It was just he got over a certain percentage of race distance. But the rest of the time, he was in the points, even the bottom end of the points, he still at least got a point or two. Yuki, nowhere near that at the moment. And the fact that Lawson is now ahead of him in the championship and is only, I think, a smattering of points away from moving up another 3 positions is mad when you think about it. And it would be very interesting to see what he could have done in the Red Bull now. But again, we just won't know because Red Bull decided that it must be the driver and not the car. Because why could it possibly they be their fault?
I think the best thing that Yuki can do, certainly beyond this season, it remains to be seen whether he gets offered a contract for 26 or not, is do what the likes of Albon and Gasly did and reinvent himself outside the Red Bull family.
Yeah, see how it goes for him at Cadillac, but it's all still to be sort of seen at Red Bull, and hopefully, if Sebastian Vettel steps in as sort of the new advisor role that he sort of the media seems to be touting him for, he's been seen going to these meetings and having conversations with Helmut Marko. Maybe Marko is finally stepping back from his role and looking to move Vettel into that position. We'll wait and see if he does and what magic he might bring with him. Meanwhile, Williams, Alex Albon qualified 12th and Carlos Sainz qualified 19th. Sainz wouldn't actually start the Grand Prix and Alex Albon wouldn't finish the Grand Prix. Rear brake failure for Sainz that led to a fire, plus something else going awry for Alex. Just wasn't meant to be this weekend, even buoyed by the news that Vowles is sticking around on a longer contract. Should probably stop predicting them for double points finishes too, as that's not.
I'm blaming you entirely for this. This all started when you started trying to get them to do stuff, so knock it off. It's not working.
It's a problem that's further emphasized by the improvements of the Sauber and Alonso's Aston Martin. Williams shut down their development stream for this car earlier than most teams as well. And while that won't impact their reliability as such, it does bring into question how long they can cling on to P5 as the other teams start jousting for their points. There's some big questions to be asked. Can they cling on till the end of the season here? Or are they going
I was saying to Jacob yesterday, they're doing a Haas of yesteryear of we'll do stonking in the first few bits of the season and then,
cling on?
no, we've forgotten how to do this now. And I think the only thing I've got to say is that it's not pretty reading whichever way you look at it, but the third consecutive Q1 exit for Sainz and the third consecutive DNF for Albon. It sums it up really, doesn't it?
But
yeah, it's hard to say. It all depends, I think, on what the other teams do. And I think it's very clear that those teams now are catching up to them. They've also got reliability problems, which some of the other teams don't have. And I think they're only 20 points, maybe ahead of the Racing Bulls now. So I think, well, it remains to be seen. I think Albon could have got a good result yesterday. He was certainly up in P7, I think, when his car decided to fail on him. But I'm not too worried about them as a whole. I think they're going to be a very good prospect going into next year with that ever so heavily rumoured Mercedes engine in the back of the car. And it could be very reminiscent of what we saw when we had the last major engine reset in 2014, where Williams were almost pretty much the best of the rest.
We'll see how it pans out for them. Next up, really, to pick over is RB. Lawson qualified 6th, finished 6th. Hadjar qualified 13th, finished 12th. And yeah, Lawson back into his usually pretty solid form and making the most of a car on a track that was to his liking. A good scrap with Fernando Alonso provided some excellent watching as well. And he's catapulted up the standings 3 places as a result of it.
Lawson this week was very much Antonelli last week with the 2 McLarens going, how long can you 2 fight so I can just stay here and hopefully get away with it? And I think that was quite a nice way for that to mirror over from one Grand Prix to the next.
Yeah, equally, Lawson moving up has now knocked Tsunoda from 15th to 17th in the driver's standings. Probably also did all this while running a little bit of floor damage from that Antonelli Verstappen moment. If you do watch the clip back, you can see that there are a couple of cars that jostle side by side for a minute, and I think we lose a bit of carbon fibre off the RB. Liam's P6 finish is the best result for a New Zealander since Chris Amon in the Spanish Grand Prix in 1976 as well, which is a fun statistic. Meanwhile, Hadjar, a bit of a nowhere race for him. Liam also finished on the lead lap, which is, like we've already said, something that cannot be said for Yuki Tsunoda.
Said Liam Lawson, highest qualifying Red Bull driver and highest finishing Red Bull driver in a Grand Prix on home turf, no less. I mean, look what happens when you develop a driver for more than 5 minutes and give them the chance to actually get used to the car. Who would have thought, huh? Hadjar, a bit uncharacteristic in having an off weekend, but I think it's important to remember, like Antonelli, despite the stellar performances, he is still a rookie. So I think he should get a little bit. It's like it's kind of just awkward that we've somehow forgotten that he is in his first season. This is only his 11th Grand Prix. So he's not doing too shabby. I was having a look at the constructors' points there, as you mentioned them just there, Jacob, and Racing Bulls 36, Williams 55. I was thinking, how bad are Red Bull going to do for the rest of the season? Could they somehow finish ahead of them? That's going to be slightly tricky. Red Bull are currently on 162, so not impossible.
Well, if Max Verstappen
but...
DNFs every week, then it'd be probably pretty easy, but that remains to be seen.
Yeah. Yeah. So jury's still out on that one. Williams is more likely at the moment.
Yes.
Yeah, just somehow across the next, what, sort of 13, 14, 13 races, Williams would have to score. What have they got to do? They've got to score 105 to get it to 60, 107 divided by 13. They've got to score, as a team, Williams have to score 8.23 points a race, assuming Red Bull scores nothing, which Williams could come home with 8.3, 8, they call it
They
9.
only need to have like a Brazil for Alpine last year to help with that along a bit to make
Yeah.
up for the occasional bit here and there. And
Nine
who
points a
knows?
race weekend and Red Bull scores nothing is not wholly unreasonable if
I
that's
mean,
Ha- Can you imagine us saying that to ourselves back in 2023?
no.
I'm not sure it's going to happen, but it sure sounds like one of Timo's crazy predictions. So, Timo, there you go. There's an idea for you.
Write it in as a wild prediction. There we go. So moving on from RB to Haas. Ocon qualified 17th, finished in the points P10. Behrman qualified 15th, did his usual Behrman thing of finishing just outside the points after a stellar drive P11. The real question here, though, is should they have left Esteban out? Should they have seen if he could do the one stopper like Alonso and Lawson managed to do? Which, given the fact that Ocon was running in clean air and wasn't fighting with anyone, stood a great chance to come home with a lot more points than he did otherwise. But equally, looking at the way that Hadjar's tyres dropped off in that final stint, maybe not. But yeah, it's one of those things that you can sort of, whichever way they went, it would have been the wrong decision for them because they are ultimately Haas. But a point off the back of
Well, you
that,
say that they still got a point either way, so
yeah. But
arguably no.
a point for their but a sole point as opposed to maybe what could have been 8 points for Ocon. It does keep them 7 points off the tail of RB and also with a strong weekend. And only 3 ahead of Sauber and 1 ahead of Aston Martin, though. The fight behind them is hotting up. So maybe Haas, now they know how the car runs, need to get a bit more competitive with those strategy calls.
I mean, knowing Haas from previous years, as we've previously mentioned, that's probably all their points for the year now. But it's certainly refreshing to see them getting points on a consistent basis now. We've come a long way from their struggles back in 2021, 22, and 23. And I suppose, yes, it would have been nice to see them stay out a little bit longer, but I suppose they weren't as brave as Lawson and Alonso were, and fortune favours the brave, I guess. But who knows? It could have all gone wrong for them. Traditionally, they've not always been great on tyres, I think, so potentially they could have fallen off anyway. So I guess we'll never know.
No, hopefully they keep up with their strong performances because I've just bought a Haas cap to bring with me to Goodwood Festival of Speed because I want to try and get Kazuki Nakajima, Gene Haas, Ayaka Matsu, Ollie Behrman, and Esteban Ocon to sign it. So I'll be able to get the full Haas contingent. Not entirely certain how Nakajima's managed to work his way into that field. But either way, he'll be driving a Haas at Goodwood Festival of Speed in about 2 weeks' time. But he's going to sign the hat. I'm going to make him sign the hat alongside Gene Haas, who earlier this week or late last week even was at Silverstone driving one of their little like very simple Formula Junior cars around their little sort of experience circuit to get used to driving a single seater, which I thought was very funny. And now they're going to chuck him up the Goodwood Hill climb in I think the VF23 or something. So interesting how that's going to go.
What
Yeah,
could possibly go wrong?
I'm going to be standing well clear when that car arrives at the top of the hill when I'm stood in the top paddock with my camera ready. But hey, we'll see what happens. Um, Aston Martin are next on the constructor standings. Alonso qualified 11th, finished 7th, and Stroll qualified 16th and finished 14th, which, when you remember that 2 cars ahead of him DNF'd, isn't really the sort of place gain you think it is. Yeah, Alonso
Never is with Stroll.
never is for Stroll. Alonso doing Alonso things, making those tyres last so long and still having something left to sort of, and the nous as well, to joust so well with Gabby in the closing stages. Absolute theatre. Stroll just being Stroll.
Yeah, Alonso v Bortoleto was just a treat to watch, and McLaren just ruined it really. But coming along up behind them and going, just bugger off for a bit, would you? Just go fight amongst yourselves. We've got a much better fight going on here between these two. So, not the two that I thought we were going to get to see battle it out quite so dramatically in Austria, but I'm here for more of it. It's kind of a little bit like Schumacher and Verstappen a couple of years ago at Silverstone. It's going, how are you two fighting each other? What's going on here? I'm not for it, but I just want to know how this happened.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see what the scrap is for those two. But it's nice to see them. I certainly see Alonso back on form now and achieving things with that car.
Yeah, certainly very refreshing. It's certainly boding very well, and hopefully they get some momentum going into what will be the first Adrian Newey car and some momentum with the Honda engine in 2026.
It will pay out, hopefully. Then next up, we have Sauber. Hulkenberg qualified 20th, finished P9, and Bortoleto qualified 8th, finished 8th, which I think is a fair reflection of sort of what he was after this weekend. And again, he seemed pretty much on it. The real question is, where has this come from? Phenomenal form, both in car setup, driving, pit stop strategy, teamwork, the lot. Lovely to see. And also, you had Alonso congratulating Gabby straight away because obviously he's his manager, sort of going over, grabbing him by the helmet. Yes, really, just sort of one of those moments where you go, oh, that's nice. Well fought for and certainly well earned. Gabby, the first Brazilian to score points in F1 since Felipe Massa 8 years ago, assuming we ignore Lewis Hamilton's honorary citizenship of the country. First Sauber double points finish since 2018, Mexico, where Leclerc finished 7th and Ericsson 9th. They also double pointed in Austria that year, 9th and 10th respectively. So I might predict they do the double again in Mexico. This is also only the 8th time in the team's history that a driver for them has gone from last to finish in the top 9. So plenty of weird statistics.
There's an even better one that I much prefer and harks back to our Red Bull conversation and how well that driver swap is going. Sauber have scored more points in the last three Grand Prix than Red Bull.
Oh,
Sink that in.
oh, oh.
And yes, all of those points came from Max Verstappen.
I mean, if you told me that and the year was 2007, different. But
Yeah, but it's 2025 and
yeah,
it's
so
not.
it really doesn't clock. Yeah. Oh, I don't know how to feel about that.
I feel good
I
about
do.
it. I
It's
mean,
bloody hilarious.
I didn't expect to be somewhat of a semi Sauber fan this year, and what is actually their last year officially in the sport. And
So
it's a
that
great way
one's
to
really
see
coming
them.
back to bite you, Jacob.
I don't know how to feel at the moment with how some of these results are going, but it's certainly very good as we have Audi coming in to take over the reins from them in 2026. And those drivers are proving to be the right choice, it seems. Bortoleto getting his first points. I've always loved the Brazilian driver. It was great to see. And Hulkenberg just doing Hulkenberg things, really. And will he ever get that podium? Hopefully, maybe not this year, but stranger things have happened.
Imagine if he does it this year, though, Jacob. Imagine if he does.
Um, oh, I'm thinking about it now, and it gets me very excited. Let's say.
I might have to go and buy myself a Sauber hat and get him to try and get
Please
this.
don't. You're going to curse him.
Hey, I'm not the one with the merch curse. That's Ellie-May, who's back in the next episode anyway. Um, Moving on then to the bottom of the constructors' rung to Alpine. Gasly qualified 10th, would finish 13th, and Colapinto qualified 14th and finished 15th. Yeah, chassis setup clearly a long way off what they need for racing. Colapinto's move nearly shunting Piastri into the grass was careless and shocking. Plus, he's got a contract extension for the rest of the season, or certainly a bit
He
more.
has done nothing
But yeah,
anywhere near enough to justify that contract
he does.
extension overdoing. I mean, you think about the difference in results, and okay, doing DNF in Australia, so did several other drivers because of that weather situation, and he got taken out in Miami if memory serves. So two things that weren't really his fault, and then I don't kind of care if Colapinto finishes ahead of where Doohan has in kind of like in position in some of the Grand Prix because ultimately he's still not scoring any points. So it doesn't matter if you're 11th or 19th, really, you're not helping team like propel up the order. So I don't know
Mm.
what it kind of like I say before, it kind of smacks suspiciously of it's almost like they never wanted to give Doohan the proper chance in the first place. But I'm
They
sure that's just me being silly.
no,
Um,
not at all.
oh, I know. Gasly, I think, if he's not already, should start talking to Cadillac because he is just withering away at Alpine. That is just not. I don't know what to do with that team. Jacob, we were talking yesterday post race about who would I want in that seat, and honestly, no one because who would want to drive for them at the moment? They're
Just,
not
I mean,
being able to do anything.
at this point, should probably think about selling the team. And very interestingly, actually, Timo, you'll know quite a bit about this because I've rabbited on to you about it for the last 3 or 4 years. In 2016, they created their 5-year plan, which again
Oh, there we go.
evolved into the 100 race plan, which was reset, I think, 3 or 4 times since about 2018. The 100 race plan, or the fourth iteration of the 100 race plan, actually ended at the Canadian Grand Prix, and they're in a worse position, I think, financially, results wise, and reputationally. But since before they
We
started, or
don't
when
know
they,
that wasn't the original plan, though.
well, I'm sure they're about to announce another 100 race plan, probably coming out in Silverstone. So eyes peeled for that one. But yeah, it's really not good. Next year could be better for them with a Mercedes engine in the back of it, but they can't, I don't think, rely on that too heavily, because we saw when Williams took it on, for example, in 2014, that was the only thing keeping them sort of up at the top end of the grid, because once the engine benefits sort of wore out and other teams caught up, their chassis was so poor that Williams fell like a stone to the bottom of the field, and we could see a rise for Alpine next year, but I think it will be somewhat of a band-aid and a temporary fix. So I don't have a lot of aspiration for that team whatsoever.
Well, I think the tumbling of Alpine's stock at the moment as it stands, I think is actually big brain theory from Flavio Briatore, who would be looking to buy out the team and turn it back into Benetton. So basically, he's compressing its worth to a point that it's affordable for him, and then going to elevate it again, or he's simply betting against betting for his own
He's
failure.
probably doing both.
Probably both. He probably stands to gain a lot from both betting on his own failure while compressing the team's worth to then buy the team with his own winnings off of betting on his own failure to then have a team that he can make win again. But on a more
Sorry, it's just the last bit on Briatore. The interesting thing with him as well is that pretty sure that the person who brought him into the team has since relinquished a role in the team. So he's not even technically, part of the team in a lot of ways. He's just hanging around.
he's
And so
just
he's
there.
he's kind of going to get all the benefit one way or the other without having to take any of the risk. And from a business side of things, very smart.
Yeah.
I
But
could,
in terms of every other aspect, what on earth are you doing?
He's like a grey-haired, strangely spectacled miasma that just follows the team around. But on a more actual,
All the kind of things he's been called.
on a more sensible and constructive point of view, well, Colapinto has picked up a
Don't
penalty.
start now.
His move against Piastri, as you're supposed to be letting him past, he's now in a bit of a precarious situation. And it's curious that we've now had news that Paul Aron, Alpine's reserve, will be an FP1 for Sauber on loan at the British and Hungarian Grand Prix. At the British Grand Prix, he's replacing Nico Hulkenberg, interesting enough. So is this just him being kept race fit and ready ahead of a seat, either at Sauber or at Alpine? He'll also do FP1 sessions for Alpine later in the season, reportedly. Whether he'll do those seasons as their full-time driver or simply as an FP1 driver hasn't been revealed by the team, but there are questions in my mind as to what they're doing with Paul Aron. Potentially they've just remembered that they've got him and gone, go on, off you go.
I mean, who really knows? I
Again,
don't think that he's going to have an in at Sauber. I think that team is, as based on what we've seen over the course of this season and yesterday, those two seats are very much locked in, and rightfully so. They've done a fantastic job. But I think Alpine are just keeping their options open, and I think a few more drivers will probably come knocking at the door in the next few weeks with a stash of money, cough cough, and whoever seems to pitch up the most money might end up with a five race asterisk contract. So we'll see. But I think they're keeping their options open right now. Throw Paul Aron in, fine. I don't think he can do any worse than Colapinto. Although I will say about Colapinto, he doesn't seem to be as crashing as much as he did last year. So there's
No,
an improvement there anyway.
no, they've dialed out the crashiness mostly. We say that, we'll see what he does at Silverstone.
I say watch Silverstone now, and we'll just go
It's some high
completely
speed
the other
straights,
way again.
big braking zones that he could properly clatter into. But anyway, with the teams out the way, I just want to dive into something I'm bringing in for the next few rounds, which is the silly season tracker, because we are, of course, sort of getting into silly season. There are seats and contract talks all over the gaff, and we still have 2 seats at Cadillac to fill out. So, as it stands at the moment, the rumour mill and silly season talk stands as such. Verstappen will move to Mercedes. Russell will take his seat at Red Bull. Bottas is supposed to go to Alpine, replacing Franco Colapinto. Sergio Perez will go to Cadillac alongside Yuki Tsunoda. Isaac Hadjar will move up to Red Bull, and Arvid Lindblad will move into the RB. The Cadillac case, however, is an interesting one because apparently across the coming weekend at the British Grand Prix, they will be having talks with Sergio Perez, Valtteri Bottas, Felipe Drugovich, Guan Yu Zhou, Jack Crawford, Yuki Tsunoda, and Jack Doohan. So busy time if you're head of hiring at Cadillac, and a lot to keep an eye on elsewhere.
For the sake of throwing some other spanners in there, no to Verstappen to Mercedes, no to Russell to Red Bull, no to Bottas to Alpine, no to Perez to Cadillac, no to Tsunoda to Cadillac, and instead we'll get Bottas and Schumacher at Cadillac. Alpine, I don't care. And Hadjar and Lindblad, yeah, I could see those happening, but I think it'll be a case of maybe Lawson and Sonoda at Red Bull, Hadjar and Lindblad at RB, and Max Verstappen going, I'm watching the 24 hours of Spa again, and I've got better things to do.
That seems like an absolutely horrible Red Bull lineup. And sorry, Yuki and Liam, but I don't think that they're going to be able to do enough to get Red Bull to the heady heights they've experienced in the last few years. So that does
I didn't say it would
sound.
work. I'm just saying that's what's going to happen.
I didn't say it'd be good.
Well, I mean, it wouldn't be bad. It'd be different to see a bit of a shake-up. But I would say I'm going to say I'd like to see Max Verstappen in the Mercedes, and
Put him
it
in
is
Aston
quite harsh
Martin
because
with Fernando Alonso and reunite him with Newey.
okay,
And you
I
get
think
rid of
I'd. I think
Stroll.
now we're mentioning that, I think I would like that one more actually because it's more of an unknown but really tantalising prospect. So if that's on the cards, yeah, I'm taking that.
We'll see what happens. That does rely on the team manager or team owner of Aston Martin telling his son that he can no longer race. But
No, no, what you do, very simple, very simple. You just lock him in a simulator with some VR goggles. You won't know the difference.
we'll wait and see. Anyway, winners and spinners. Timo, I'd like to start with your winner, please.
Got to be Liam Lawson. I mean, the fact that he did all of that in Red Bull's backyard, that is a statement, and it's quite a fun one to make. So more of that, please, and thank you.
Jacob, your winner.
I've mentioned his name quite a few times on the podcast, but my favourite and everyone's favourite rookie, Fernando Alonso.
Very nice. And I'm going to go for Fernando Alonso's manageree, Gabriel Bortoleto. His great form pace was spot on, and that Sauber has found its footing, and he's making the most of it. I think his efforts rightly rewarded this weekend. Spinners, Timo, yours.
Got to be Yuki Tsunoda because, geez, Rick, geez.
G. Willikers, indeed. Jacob, your spinner.
I'm going to take a driver that was finished just ahead of Yuki and say Franco Colapinto.
Ooh, fair. I'm going to go for Lance Stroll because when your teammate is up front making a worldie of a one-stopper work and fighting on those tyres, how are you that far off the pace?
I'm fairly sure we just chose the bottom three drivers there.
Yeah, but I think we gave
Yeah.
good reason for that as well. Meanwhile, speaking of spinners, it's time for our predictions review where none of us scored points. So moving on
I
to
got I got half of the wild prediction, which was more than I thought I was going to get for that one, to be fair.
yeah,
But
yeah,
that's already something.
but
It's
yeah,
closer than we usually get to wild predictions.
yeah, but no points anywhere else.
Yeah.
And if we move into the fantasy F1 review, which I have actually checked beforehand, so I'm not entirely surprised by where I finish in this. For Austria, Le Victory comes out on top, 279 points. RHR Silvanar, I don't know what that's supposed to be, 225 points in second place. And on the curbs IndyCar, 216. Well done, Timo, with whatever you did there.
I'm as surprised as any of us. I think I may have pivoted and gone to doing well in the fantasy league instead of the predictions for the last couple of rounds. I think that's where I'm at.
Maybe, maybe. Catherine's Curse finishes P5, on the curbs P6, Can't Grow Moustache P18, the Mixing Pot, which is one of my teams, P22.
That was your highest.
That was my highest team. I thought it had done well because it got like a couple of hundred points, but apparently, much like the times for qualifying, it was all quite closely bunched. Hopeful Heroes P57 and Red Bull Rejects P63. I think they're on like minus 40 from this race weekend, which was
Yeah, that was not a good time to have anyone from Red Bull aside from Lawson in your team.
yeah. Overall, the victory 2043 points, Lando 2042 points, 1 point in it, and the Tiklias 2035 points. Catherine's Curse, meanwhile, P6, Can't Grow Moustache P9, on the curve P12, the Mixing Pot P18, tumbling down the order, Red Bull Rejects P62, and Kiwi Burners P63, which would have been a good weekend to have the correct Liam Lawson in your team, which they don't. So they probably got
Red Bull Rejects / Ellie-May are probably quite happy that Kiwi Burners are there because without them, they would be dead last right now. And fortunately, that's not going to change anytime soon because I think there's about a 300-point difference between 62nd and 63rd in the standings overall, which is mental.
I am still logged in actually. Let's see what the bottom of that rank of our ranking is for all races. Kiwi Burners 187 points, Red Bull Rejects 490, so a 303 point difference which is quite impressive. Kiwi burners. Is he still? Yeah, still running the wrong
Yeah.
Lawson. He scored 2 points with Pierre Gasly, 20 with Ocon, 25 with Bortoletto, none with Doohan, 34 points with Racing Bulls, and 19 with Mercedes, minus the inactive driver penalty points of minus 75, gives him a total of 25 this weekend.
I believe you also had the excellent decision of having Albon on double points, so that worked out for you in one of your teams. I did wonder how you were so far down. I clicked on the team and saw, oh, yep, that'll do it.
Yeah, if I set this to show me just the Austrian results, I did not do very well there at all. Red Bull Rejects is Ellie-May's one. Where's my very low one? Hopeful Heroes. I had Albon. I had Antonelli on the double, so I got doubled to minus 36. Immediately wiping out Norris's 36. So yeah, not great. Williams on minus 36 as well for that double DNF did not help my standings. So that's all we've got time for on this episode of the Undercut podcast. We'll be back for a preview of the British Grand Prix in a few short days. Ellie-May is back from gallivanting all over Europe doing classic motor racing things. In the meantime, though, let's start with Jacob. Any more from you? Where can people find more of you?
You can find me over on X at JacobPhil18. You can also find me over on Instagram at Long Live the Local Pub, where I'll be frequenting a pub somewhere in the UK. And if you can't find me on there, you'll find me in a pub garden somewhere.
Perfect. And Thiemo, in the meantime, where can we find more of you?
Well, this week there is a bonus episode of On the Curbs IndyCar out, where I have a conversation about all things IndyCar with Sky Sports IndyCar commentator Tom Gaymore. So go and check that out.
Very nice indeed. And if you want more from me, you can, of course, pick up the latest issue of Classic Car Weekly. You'll still be able to pick up the issue that's got me doing a quad test of Lotus Esprits around Silverstone. Or you can pick up the next one. I can't remember what we've got in that. We've got 125 years of Fiat celebrated with an A to Z of the mark. You can also listen to the Classic Car Weekly podcast or follow me on social media at Jesse on Cars on most platforms. And if you're out and about this weekend but not at the British Grand Prix, you might be at Le Mans Classic, which is where I will be watching 4 days of classic racing around the iconic circuit. So plenty to keep you all occupied, and we'll be back with a preview of the British Grand Prix very soon.